The Florida Keys Labor Day hurricane of 1935 is remembered as one of the most intense storms in U.S. history. This was a Category 5 hurricane, striking with winds that reached speeds of 185 miles per hour. The storm originated in the Bahamas, then moved west, reaching its most powerful moments just before making landfall in the Florida Keys. Its strong winds destroyed entire communities and killed 408 people, many of whom were World War I veterans working on construction of the overseas highway. In addition to the loss of life, the hurricane caused an estimated $6 million in property damage, the equivalent of approximately $135 million today. The tropical cyclone began to lose strength as it moved along the west coast of Florida, reaching as far as Norfolk, Virginia, before it finally dissipated over the Atlantic Ocean. If you think this is terrifying, well, it only gets worse from here. Today, we're comparing sizes of the deadliest hurricanes ever recorded. We'll take a look at their paths, wind speeds, and the destruction they left behind. But before we continue with the list, let's go over some basics. Hurricanes are powerful tropical storms that form over warm ocean waters. They begin as tropical disturbances, which are areas of low pressure and thunderstorms. Now, when these disturbances come up against high humidity and relatively light winds, they can intensify into tropical depressions and then tropical storms. If their wind speeds reach 75 miles per hour, the storm gets classified as a hurricane. Now, the term hurricane is used in the North Atlantic, the central North Pacific, and eastern North Pacific. In other parts of the world, they're called typhoons or just tropical cyclones. These storms are measured using the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, which categorizes storms on a scale of 1 to 5 based on their sustained wind speeds. Which was the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history? And what should you do to survive one? With the New England hurricane of 1938, also known as the Long Island Express. This one started over the Atlantic Ocean, likely reaching Category 5 strength as it hit Puerto Rico. By the time it made landfall in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, it had weakened to a Category 3 hurricane with wind speeds between 112 and 129 miles per hour. The storm's heavy rainfall led to significant flooding of the Connecticut River and storm surges in Narragansett Bay, Rhode Island, and Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts. The widespread devastation across the northeastern United States caused approximately 600 deaths and inflicted over $300 million in property damage. Next up is the Sea Islands hurricane of 1893, a Category 3 storm that caused chaos along the southeastern U.S. coast, with winds reaching 120 miles per hour. Formed over the Atlantic, it moved west toward the Lesser Antilles before heading north through the Bahamas and striking the Sea Islands of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina. This hurricane was devastating, killing an estimated 1,000 to 2,000 people and causing $1 million in property damage, which was a lot of money back in 1893, about $35 million in today's dollars. The hurricane's impact hit hardest in Beaufort County, South Carolina, where buildings were destroyed and roads and bridges were washed away. Huge areas of farmland were left unusable from all the flooding and saltwater damage. The storm also caused a population decline as people left the area in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Moving on, we have the Chenier-Caminada hurricane of October 1893. A Category 4 storm carrying winds of 130 miles per hour. This hurricane's path of destruction was far-reaching, affecting approximately 500 miles of coastline. It formed in the Caribbean Sea and took a destructive path northwest toward the Gulf of Mexico, ultimately making landfall in Chenier-Caminada, Louisiana. The small fishing village was virtually wiped off the map as the hurricane caused $5 million in property damage. Mississippi also experienced significant damage. Crops were flattened and fields flooded in coastal towns and cities. The final death toll was approximately 2,000 people. About a third of these deaths happened in Shamir Kamanana. This makes it the second deadliest storm in Louisiana history, surpassed only by our next entry. Hurricane Katrina, which struck in September 2005, reached Category 5 with wind speeds exceeding 175 miles per hour. Katrina resulted in 1,836 deaths and caused an unprecedented $125 billion in damage. It's the most costly hurricane ever to hit the United States. Its journey began in the Caribbean Sea, making its first landfall in South Florida. Then it moved into the Gulf of Mexico, where it intensified significantly. When Katrina made its second landfall near Buras, Louisiana, it unleashed its full fury on the Gulf Coast. But it was in New Orleans where Katrina was particularly devastating. The city's complex system of levees designed to protect against flooding failed catastrophically in multiple locations. As a result, approximately 80% of New Orleans was submerged under floodwaters, some areas experiencing depths of up to 15 feet. Entire communities were uprooted, and many residents who evacuated never returned. This meant a decrease of over 250,000 people after Katrina. That's over half of the city's population. It took 3 weeks for New Orleans to dry out, and the reconstruction would take years. Okay, going back to 1928, we encountered the San Felipe Okeechobee hurricane, a Category 5 storm with wind speeds reaching 160 miles per hour. It killed at least 2,500 people in the U.S. and caused $75 million in property damage. The hurricane's origins can be traced back to the Atlantic, making landfall in the Leeward Islands before moving toward Puerto Rico, with many fatalities resulting from collapsed buildings and flying debris. The hurricane continued northwest, making landfall near West Palm Beach, Florida. However, it was the area around Lake Okeechobee that suffered the most severe consequences. Storm surges reached up to 9 feet high, sweeping away homes, crops, and livestock. Many of the fatalities occurred in the communities surrounding the lake, where the floodwaters rose rapidly, catching residents off guard. The destructive path continued through North Carolina before moving into the Great Lakes region, where it finally dissipated. This next one is the most recent on our list. Well, at least in terms of the deadliest hurricanes. While Hurricane Beryl just wreaked havoc in the Caribbean, it's nowhere near as deadly as Hurricane Maria was back in September of 2017. This Category 5 storm, with wind speeds reaching 175 miles per hour, resulted in 3,059 deaths and caused an estimated $90 billion in property damage. The storm first made landfall in Dominica, where its powerful winds and heavy rains obliterated buildings, uprooted trees, and led to widespread flooding. Maria then whooshed its way over to Puerto Rico as a Category 4 hurricane, bringing winds of 150 miles per hour and 23 inches of rain. The island's power grid was completely devastated, leading to one of the longest blackouts in U.S. history. The lack of electricity had a cascading effect, disrupting water supplies, healthcare services, and communication systems. The hurricane continued north, striking North Carolina and Newfoundland before dissipating in the Atlantic. Topping the list and standing as the deadliest weather disaster in U.S. history is the Galveston hurricane of 1900. This Category 4 hurricane, with wind speeds reaching 145 miles per hour, killed approximately 8,000 people and caused roughly $30 million in property damage, which was a lot at the time. After traveling across the Atlantic Ocean and hitting the Gulf of Mexico, the hurricane made landfall on Galveston. The city, located on a barrier island off the Texas coast, wasn't prepared for such destructive power. The storm surge overwhelmed the low-lying island, sweeping away buildings, homes, and infrastructure. Entire neighborhoods were obliterated, and thousands of residents were caught in the raging floodwaters. And many of the victims drowned or were crushed by collapsing buildings. The once thriving port city, which had been a major economic hub, faced years of rebuilding and economic hardship. The city took measures to mitigate future risks, including raising the level of the entire city and constructing a seawall to protect against storm surges. When a hurricane is forecasted, it's crucial to seek sturdy shelter or evacuate to a safer location. Ensure you have an emergency kit with essential supplies like flashlights and your important documents. Stay informed through reliable weather sources and pay attention to the evacuation orders or warnings issued by local authorities. Once the hurricane arrives, stay indoors and away from windows. Even after the eye of the storm passes, remain indoors until authorities declare it safe to go outside. Now, if you think a hurricane is scary, well, you haven't seen just how big a tsunami can get.